Zip! Huh? I have been asking you if you want extra cheese on your pizza for like 10 minutes. What's up with you?
Oh, sorry.
Kid, that wasn't even like 10 seconds. What's up with you? Fair enough. I just didn't like her attitude there. As a new generation comes and goes, we're given not one, but two shows for Generation 5. One was a miniseries exclusively on YouTube called Tell Your Tale, and the other is a CG animated series on Netflix that I'll be covering here called Make Your Mark. Upon anticipating this generation, I've admittedly been intimidated because the reception has been pretty ugly. Reviews have been met with torches and pitchforks instead of being treated as another welcoming addition. To play the devil's advocate, I know where they're coming from. The show is very rushed and incredibly uneven. The story is uneven, the pacing is uneven, the character development is uneven, the list goes on. There's a laundry list that speculates what the hell Hasbro was thinking, but if you want further details, a YouTuber named CXCD has a video discussing the production history and how everything went to shit. Just take it with a grain of salt though, because there haven't been any provided sources on the matter. With that being said, there are more than a handful of things I also appreciated about Make Your Mark. It's been a part of the reason why I haven't been nearly as angry as other people were. There were moments in the show that tugged my heartstrings, or shared moments that I found to be admirable. And I'm not the only one in the same ballpark. There are a couple of fans of Generation 5, and I'm definitely happy for them. Also, this series was barely getting off the ground, so I expected some trial and error to happen. That's really a standard when a new show approaches. I will address the show's flaws, but I'm going to be as constructive as I can about it and acknowledge the moments that I did enjoy. It was just a question of how I was going to review it. So without further ado, here's the actual pilot to Make Your Mark. Yeah, I should first correct myself here. When I reviewed A New Generation, I said that was the pilot, and I was very wrong there. I assumed so because it was the kickoff to G5. This pilot, however, has more setup on where the characters lie, what their motives are, and what new obstacles we'll face. A New Generation wasn't that. It had its own narrative. What follows here is debating whether or not having magic back was the best outcome. Meanwhile, some of the characters have their subplots that do set up their goals over the course of the show, as what any pilot should. And it's one of the main reasons why I didn't get as angry as others did. Unfortunately, some of these have little to no discussion and are just there. They can be a bit distracting sometimes to follow the main narrative, and thus making the pacing problematic. Something I'm also not fond of is the animation. Before Generation 5 took off, I was not looking forward to hearing that this was going to be animated in CGI. One of which was the obvious bias that whenever it comes to animation, I'm a bigger fan of hand-drawn, or at least so whereabouts. I don't necessarily hate CGI either, but it is oversaturated and there hasn't been much variety in the department of animation. But in TV form, I had a much harder time adjusting to CG animated titles because of how janky and unnatural the movements were. I was accustomed to how fluent everything was in film. Make Your Mark was another one of them. Now, obviously this is due to having a smaller budget and production team, but outside of reviewing My Little Pony content, I was more of a film person than I was with television. Now, Friendship is Magic is no stranger when making earlier mistakes either. Season 1 had a ton of animation issues that some people spotted, such as the Cyclops stallion in The Best Night Ever, and the strange, uneven angle of Twilight's face at the end of Fall with Her Friends. But back to the pilot, our central conflict is Sunny trying to solve a handful of complaints and adjustment issues some ponies have had over the returning of magic. Most of the time, she's troubled by Posy Bloom, who's extremely cranky behind all of this, and is the leading cause of these said complaints.
You Pegasi are always flying too fast, or too low, or too high up.
What's wrong with flying high up?
Ugh, I just don't like it, okay?
From what I remember, she's gained a bad rep from even the fans of Generation 5, and with an understandable reason. She has a cranky and unpleasant attitude about how frustrated she is with everyone's use of some magic, and even drags Hitch into discussion. But by how problematic the use of magic has become, Sunny herself is trying to figure out how to work with her Alicorn abilities. Until then, it's unfortunately random and beyond her control. When I reviewed A New Generation, I took a guess that the magic was subconscious and trusting her, given her willfulness in supporting the existence of magic. Within this pilot, I was somewhat correct. It's sentient by a stable trust of other races and is held together by the Unity Crystals at their newly built lighthouse. The Crystal Bright House? Okay. Puns will be puns, I guess. Some ponies have puns for names, after all. As a consequence, the Unity Crystals become unstable for everyone's magic, dependent on the uses. This is based on the pilot's major obstacle that Zip learns due to the sour impression on the use of magic. In an attempt to present it in a better light, Sunny spends most of the pilot proposing some additional features for the town's traditional festival called Maritime Bay Day. Heh, try saying that without saying payday by accident. As we learn where the crystals are located, I should talk about the Bright House itself and the rest of the characters, given this is a pilot and that it's important to address everyone's setup. Upon inspection, the Bright House interior is very colorful and exciting. The rainbow tile at the entrance and the stained glass windows. Not to mention the bedroom is filled with so much personality where each character has their own bed design, such as Pip's bed with a mic stand and a desktop with a hovering disco ball, and Zip's upper bunker with neon lights and a mounted desk. It's a bit of a sleepover cliche, but I can't help but adore the very room. Not to mention, I love the elevator where it takes us to the Unity Crystals at the top of the tower.
The magic from the Unity Crystals in the Bright House is new to all of us. It takes practice.
Crowdfunding for GoldenFox Pictures has been made possible by these following supporters. For patrons, I'd like to thank Angel of Speed, Ashley Kaufman, Blue Griffin Alzora, Brandon Bishop, DigiSketch, Edwin Flores, Iceberg, Drog1989, Jig Denton, Michael Wallace, Rainbow Hooves 521, Ripple Effect, Science Steel Rail, Shuka, Spinelliver87, and Warzone. And for channel members, Azure Lore, Chuck Zone, Spinelliver87, Victor Hernandez, and Zombie King. Thank you all very much for your support. If you would like a shout out in my videos, support me on Patreon or join as a channel member on YouTube, and you can get these following perks as well depending on what you choose. For patrons, you get sneak peeks and monthly group calls, and channel members, you get exclusive, uncensored, ad-free content, badges, and custom emojis. Links are down in the description. Setting that little detour aside, we are directed to Izzy and Pip in the same room as they unveil a surprise idea for Sunny, her old lantern. It doesn't have as much of a contribution to the narrative, but I do love seeing it as a Chekhov's gun for the final act. This is mentioned before in one of my earlier reviews, but in a rather negative light, so I'll just break down how important a Chekhov's gun is and why I perceive it as that. The Chekhov's gun is a narrative method where a plot device sits in the background somewhere at the beginning of a story, and would later play a bigger role in the final act. Some would argue that this is a form of foreshadowing, but foreshadowing lets the viewers know what's already happened before the story begins, which isn't as surprising. Nonetheless, I find this to be a nice touch to Izzy's character as she puts herself before others. And in this case, I find it to be incredibly wholesome as it not only contributes near the end of the episode, but a good callback to what happened in A New Generation. A bit of a continuity nod to Sunny's development and how precious Izzy can be.
So, the other day when I was searching for my box of googly eyes in the basement, I found this.
Is that Sunny's old lantern?
Well, her dad made it for her when she was a filly.
Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about Pip. Don't get me wrong, her excitement is wholesome with Izzy here, and she means very well whenever she tries to do something positive. This is on top of the fact that I wanted to see her be used more often after A New Generation. But for the most part, Pip can be a real pain in the ass. Not in a jerkful way, rather I just find her annoying. She keeps pulling out song ideas over many episodes, making herself the center of attention, and the songs themselves get very grating. They're mostly afterthought pop songs where the lyrics are directly referring to a current event instead of putting some actual thought into its own writing. So every time she randomly sings, I just roll my eyes in annoyance and just want her song to be done and over with. On the contrary, I do like that she embraces her content creating status, spreading a positive influence to her followers to whom she calls pipsqueaks. To some extent, I know it's gonna sound weird coming from me because a lot of viewers took issue with her on this. She's represented as the social norm of Gen Z, where content creating is the current obsession. Pot me kettle, dumbasses. Nearly everybody uses phones at any age. They're a useful source of communication in our current society. Might as well blame Star Trek for that influence, which was first aired back in the 1960s. You know, Scotty beam me up. Hell, Zip has arguably used her phone more resourcefully, mostly for investigating as we come to her character next. Compared to everyone else, Zip is more focused on the main narrative where she observes the Unity Crystal's behaviors, considering that she witnessed the dangers of the glitches that applied to the Pegasi's flying abilities. Not much else to say here other than she was the most involved. It's why she's been avoiding any of the Maritime Bay Day festivities her friends have been focusing on. Adding insult to injury, she's in a conundrum with her mother, Queen Haven. For a while, Haven wanted Zip to return to Zephyr Heights for her duties of becoming a princess and later taking the throne as a queen, thus putting her in an identity crisis on where she belongs.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, it's just that I love it here in Maritime Bay so much. I don't want to leave yet.
Leave?
Go back to Zephyr Heights.
But you just got here!
I know. I'm not ready to become a full-time heir to the throne princess yet. Not the way my mom expects me to be anyway. But I'm not sure if I fit in here either.
Personal note here, this turmoil was the most interesting to have used for an overarching narrative in the series. She's made friends, she's had some adventures, and she's shown an interest in being a detective, and her detective skills play throughout the entire series. All of that is bound to be sapped away at the expense of her family bloodline. Placing yourself in her shoes, it's difficult to imagine that. No longer would you have time to spend with your friends and have some fun. Rather, you have to cater to everyone else's bullshit. Ones involving royalties, maintaining a status, and keep a track with everyone you have to make decisions for. Haven even explains how exhausting it is setting up social gatherings for parties. Huh. Seems to make more sense now at how Kiara felt in Lion King 2, Simba's Pride.
As future queen.
What if I don't want to be queen? It's no fun.
Sadly, however, this was never really touched upon after the pilot. Rather, bits and pieces of it in Tell Your Tale. This is a personal pet peeve of mine because aside from how interesting this arc would have been had there been more focus, it's the same issue I had with the IDW comics, covering storytelling details. Oh, what's that? You want to know more about this integral set piece? Lamau, just look up this other show or comic book. I shouldn't have to look outside of the root source of media to understand it better. It has to stand on its own. This isn't doing any favors. I said this several times before, so I don't want to be repetitive. It's not as crucial since it's another form of the same generation, but I still can't stand it when an integral plot point is set up for the consumer to inconveniently look into another source. It's not fair to the average viewer, and it's a terribly manipulative marketing strategy. Moving on to other characters, we come to Hitch where he tries adapting his job with the existence of magic. For the most part, he's pretty well adjusted in having magic around while he's being the town sheriff, and even includes a small herd of creatures as his deputies. A rather interesting approach. Still better than Sprout. Occasionally, Hitch tries to figure out a few issues relating to the misuse of magic or lack thereof. As mentioned earlier, Posey attempted to drag him into whether or not magic should be allowed. The next occasion is when he's called to a beach where a sandcastle is ruined by an umbrella, and with a unicorn particularly who states her magic was out of her grip of the said umbrella. This obviously refers to the magic glitches earlier that Zip witnessed as she spies on the matter. Once again, an argument ensues about the existence of magic, and once again, Hitch is dragged into it. To some degree, I would presume that this challenges his current state of development as opposed to who he used to be, and this sounds great on paper given the current conflict of adapting to new changes. However, that isn't very apparent, and it would have been nice to see it played up a bit better. Show how stable he is with his current state and capable of helping others with their problems. On the contrary, he has a side plot where he's found an egg while he was at the beach. Obviously, this is a precursor to the dragon Sparky, who appears in Chapter 2. But aside from that, there really isn't much to say here other than being a B-plot about him, figuring out where it's from, and continuing to be noble by keeping it safe. With all the main characters and their contributions out of the way, let's cut back to the pilot's supposed antagonist, Posy Bloom. Near the final act, she rallies up Earth ponies and protesting against magic, and uses the amount of mishaps from the glitches to her advantage in her argument.
It isn't fair. We Earth ponies don't get any magic, and then the ponies that do have it don't even know how to use it. Or they use it to prank us.
This is when the pilot actually drops the ball. Posy is often seen as a jerk, which explains why even Gen 5 fans didn't like her. But earlier in the episode, we learned that she's taken issue with magic because of how much of an inconvenience and sometimes a danger she's been put in. For the most part, I understood why she acted the way she did, and that's enough to hint the audience that some special abilities shouldn't be taken for granted. And that was the message I was able to see every time I watched the pilot. But this line right here makes her character fall apart by spreading bad faith over the other races and making her character just a plain jerk in general and having no concrete character. To make it even worse, let's cut back to the sentience of magic. As the main characters return to the Bright House, it's revealed that the glitches were happening because everyone has many arguments or unpleasant feelings over the usage of magic. Okay, I get it. It's playing off of the theming of friendship as a nod to the previous generation it's connected with. But this gives a very wrong impression to the audience on what the message was supposed to represent. Adapt to new changes and not take it for granted. But in execution, there's a few things that frustrated me. As we witness what glitches happened to the unicorns and Pegasi earlier, it puts a really bad light on how it works. It's meant to display how punishing it is if the magic is taken for granted, but a lot of this was at the expense of freak accidents and happenstance, as if the crystals are trolling everyone. For example, that beach incident occurred because an umbrella was dropped on a sandcastle. The unicorn stated that the magic disappeared and thus losing her grip. Did the two ponies argue beforehand? No. And what does that say about the two Pegasi who were just flying, minding their own business, and were just falling all of a sudden? Same thing with Zip when she tried to fly. They were minding their own business. No arguments there. Not to mention, Posy brought up an issue earlier that she was magically restrained to the floor and thought it was a prank from a unicorn somewhere. The only other possible guess to all of this is that these glitches happen to practically everyone if there's a single argument or misuse of magic anywhere at any time in Equestria. And if so, that's incredibly unfair to everyone else who's using their magic properly. It's overcorrecting everything, which gives a bad impression to the viewers. Be kind, or everyone else pays the price. That makes the rules of its magic and its overall intended message fundamentally fall apart. In general, arguments are bound to happen. There's going to be certain moments in life that are unpleasant. They're an inevitable cause because mistakes happen. And you know that saying, we learn from mistakes. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with being kind to one another. It's obviously a part of good manners and socializing. But to try to represent it as a severe punishment is such an overkill. You could argue that maybe Posy was just being rash at the expense of what she went through, but it still doesn't take away the fact that this gives the viewers the wrong impression. Now, to the magic's credit, the main characters rediscovered that their magic works with them by embracing their friendship and trust, something that worked in the movie, and it's what Posy was tearing apart earlier in the pilot. Thus, they're given leverage into helping the Earth ponies who have been magically restrained. In addition, Sunny is aided from the magic by risking her life to save Posy and Windy when they're dragged into a growing bottomless pit.
It's too dark in there. Take this.
As the climax comes to a close, Earth ponies are given their own ability. Yes, you heard that right, Earth ponies actually get magic. And their ability? To grow plants from the ground up. It's a bit overpowering at times, but for the most part, that's actually pretty cool. And given the connections with Generation 4, it makes sense given that Earth ponies were known to plant and grow crops for food. That is, according to Heartswarming Eve and Applejack's job. Though I'm not too sure about Hitch being able to talk to animals. Fluttershy had that ability and she's a Pegasus. Yet, other Pegasi don't have that ability here.
Why do I now have the magical power to understand every animal except for this adorable baby dragon?
Hitch, he's a baby. Babies won't be able to talk until they grow and obtain the skill. Thought you would have known that already. As for the rest of the pilot, Zip sorts matters out with her mother, the egg hatches and brings a Sparky, and we're given two new characters that foreshadow the next chapter, Opaline and Misty Bright Dawn. I'll have more to say for them when I review Chapter 2. As I conclude my overall thoughts on this pilot, I'm going to be perfectly honest. This was quite possibly the hardest review I've ever done in reviewing My Little Pony content. When making this review, it took me so long to get thoughts down, fighting through the awareness of the negative reception that have discouraged me and clouded my mind when trying to be level-headed. Never did I expect so much insecurities to become such an obstacle for a review. The only thing closest to that was when I was reviewing Do Princesses Dream of Magic Sheep, and after finally getting through this review, I can understand both sides of the reception behind this pilot. Its execution is sloppy in a few areas, especially the message and the functionality of the world's magic. The CG animation had room for improvement, and the soundtrack was unbearable because of Pip. However, I still love where the characters stand. The additional magic and new characters to come are exciting to where I was willing to anticipate the next chapter. If I were to recommend this pilot for any newcomers for Gen 5, I would say marginally. It's there to set up the show's format, but it's messy in the execution and preferred to be watched maybe at least once as the later chapters improve. But what do the rest of you think? To G5 fans, where do you stand on this entry? I like to hear your side of the matter, and not just everybody else. And maybe let me know if I was fair with it or not. Until next time, this is GoldenFox, and Hoof to Heart.